When you're ready.
We're born.
Hi, I'm Tobias Carlisle. This is the Acquirers Podcast. My special guest today is Eric Jorgenson. He is the author of the Navalmanack. It is exactly what it sounds like. It's a collection of everything that Naval Ravikant has written. It's an absolutely fascinating read. I'm so glad that someone has done it. It's a fantastic project. In his day job, Eric's a product manager at Zali. We're going to talk about that too right after this.
Tobias Carlisle is the founder and principal of Acquirers Funds. For regulatory reasons, he will not discuss any of the Acquirers Funds on this podcast. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Acquirers Funds or affiliates. For more information, visit acquirersfunds.com.
I saw you tweeting about the Navalmanack, and the moment that I saw it, I was like, I know exactly what this is, and this is a brilliant idea, and I'm so glad someone has collected all of Naval's tweets together in like a Charlie Munger style Charlie's Almanack. So,
Yeah.
the story. What's the story, man? How'd the project come about?
Yeah, it was very haphazard actually. Like I wish I could say it was more intentional. Like I had the same kind of hope. Like it was after that podcast he did on Farnham Street that was like one of the huge kind of like breakout things. And I was like, man, this stuff is so good. It seems like too good for a podcast. And he was just dropping like amazing tweets. I think it was even before the How to Get Rich tweet storm.
Right.
And I was like, God, there's just so much like good stuff here. And I've been following Naval for 10 years. And half the books I read are these amazing like compilations of stuff that people have put together. You know, if you study Munger, like you've read a bunch of compilations. And so I was like, man, somebody needs to do this. And so I tweeted, it was a very half-assed tweet. My first draft of the title was The Book of Knowledge. And like he retweeted it and was like, and 5,000 people were like, oh my God, yeah, please do this. And half the replies were like, you've got to pick a better title, dude. That is garbage. I was like, yeah, it's like 10 o'clock at night. I was just fucking around on Twitter. Calm down. But yeah, it came together quickly, and I was like, oh, I guess this is like a real project really quickly. But yeah, loving Port Charlie's Almanack and a lot of Peter Bevelin stuff. This was such a like, someone's got to do it. I'm glad it clicked for you right away too. Like,
it's just he's so great. He's great to listen to. Like I loved him on that Rogan podcast. If anything, I kind of felt like Rogan let him down a little bit because Rogan, as much as I love Rogan, it just Naval's so thoughtful, and you need to sit there and listen to it and kind of absorb it. And I felt like Rogan didn't follow up, or kind of wasn't really following what he was saying on some occasions. And I thought, I think I knew about your project at that stage. And I thought, what I really want to do is sit down and read through this. Because again, on Twitter, it doesn't really work. The tweet storms, there's just too much distraction on Twitter to kind of really sit and think. So the Naval podcasts are great if you're walking around and you're just listening to them. But again, for whatever reason, I find it easier to sort of absorb stuff if it's written down and you've got enough time to kind of go over it. So it's a great project.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited about it. I can't wait to see what's going to happen here. Like, I don't know exactly. I know like Naval's got a lot of fans, and there's a lot of people who seem excited about having a book version, you know, exactly like you were saying, like a little more, his stuff is great, but it's all very, any individual interview tends to cover a lot of ground very thinly.
Right.
And he's refined the same ideas for, 10 years. And so when you can find kind of like the best iteration of each idea and thread them together in like kind of a categorized way, like I feel like people will be able to grok the ideas a lot better reading them through in a synthesized kind of organized way with no interpretation whatsoever. Like there is not an original word in this book. I don't claim there to be one. Like I just put all the best stuff that Naval said reorganized in a way that like made a cohesive book, and hopefully it's really dense and interesting, and people, it's a helpful kind of new format for existing wisdom.
So you've broken the book up into it's in two broad parts: wealth and then happiness, and then each of those has these subcategories. So wealth is pardon me, I just looked this up very quick. Wealth is building wealth and building judgment. And then happiness is learning happiness, saving yourself, and the philosophy. I think most people listening to this podcast are probably most interested in the building wealth and probably the building judgment part of it, but the other stuff is important too. But let's start. Let's give folks what they want first out of the gate. So, can you what have you learned from synthesizing all of this information, and can you take us through the what building wealth? And I'm going to take you through it bit by bit. But let's what's building wealth about?
Yeah, building wealth is kind of an interesting take because it's really looking at the principles around it. There's not a lot of tactics in there. It's really kind of dissecting the process of building wealth into its component pieces, which is, something like applying leverage, understanding that your judgment is actually what is building wealth, not your work. So separating, time as an input from your hourly earnings. Using stuff like capital and products and labor to apply leverage. So, I'm sure most of the investors that you are talking to are very capital leveraged and very judgment focused. And you see some of the wealthiest people on the planet come out of that. Warren Buffett's judgment is paramount, and he gets a lot of capital behind that because every extra dollar has no marginal cost. His judgment is just better, and so value accrues to him in a way that it doesn't to anyone else.
So let's start with the first one here. How is wealth created?
Yeah, Naval says wealth is created by assets that earn while you sleep. Separating wealth from money, where money is a tool that we use to kind of exchange value, and wealth is this extensive leverage that works while you sleep. So the money keeps making money, the property keeps getting rented, the software keeps serving customers, and that outpacing your own effort with that sort of wealth creation tools, those machines, those processes, those other people who learn the same things that you learn and can apply them on your behalf. That really, wealth doesn't come out of the 1-for-1 exchange. It comes out of finding a way to get 10 for 1 or 100 for 1 or 1,000 for 1.
He talks about leverage a little bit lower down, so we'll come to that when we come to it. But what does he mean by find and build specific knowledge?
Yeah, specific knowledge is an interesting one, and I think it's counterintuitive for people. Specific knowledge kind of comes from this sense that you can't be someone else. If you're trying to chase Warren Buffett's shoes, but you haven't been reading S1 since you were 13 and, buying gumball machines, then you're not going to win the way Warren Buffett won. So finding the things that you are uniquely good at and kind of getting into, productizing yourself and extending yourself, like your own brand, things that come easily to you, things that come naturally to you. If your gift is talking to people, having a podcast to represent your fund may come easier to you than writing a book to represent your fund. So finding the things that are natural to you, and that you can go uniquely far at. And when you're into the extreme of this, you become the only person who can solve specific problems with your specific knowledge. So, when the government, not to overuse Warren Buffett as an example here, but when the government, needs to find someone to bail out banks, that's a short list of people you can call. And so Warren Buffett's specific knowledge and specific resources become very, very important there. Elon Musk may be the only person who can will the Neuralink into existence, despite the science just not being there. And he has done it a few times, just kind of creating this theatrical thing that forces the science to move more quickly. You and I could go through the same motions and it wouldn't have the same impact because we haven't run this path. And so I think it is hard because it's so natural to study other wealthy people or other successful people, deconstruct their formula, and then try to do it yourself. And Naval really encourages people to look at the principles that worked for them and understand the principles of how wealth is created, but don't lose sight of the fact that you can't become someone else, and you have to figure out how to apply your own talents and your own interests. Otherwise, you're going to be swimming upstream your whole life and never, really have the wind at your back.
Yeah, that's kind of fascinating, that point about Musk. I've been reading the book Sapiens, and there's an interesting part at the beginning of that book where he talks about humanity has willed all of these ideas that we've imagined these things like nations and companies and money, and we all kind of know that they're not real, but we treat them as if they are, and it helps us to kind of coordinate. And I think that that's what very good entrepreneurs do too, that the idea is so tangible that other people are prepared to come and work along with them to create this thing that doesn't really exist. And Musk might be the entrepreneur because he's able to, we're going to put a rocket in space, we're going to build an electric car, we're going to stick, mind control of, we're going to stick stuff in your brain that allow you to control stuff. So I think it's a really great example. One of the things that I've discovered probably as I've got older, and this is one of Naval's points as well, is that you want to play long-term games with long-term people. What's he mean by that?
Yeah, the long-term games piece comes from something that I'm sure everyone here is familiar with, which is just that all returns come from compounding. You're not going to win any games with one kind of at bat. Like, you've got to keep showing up and keep doing preferably the same thing, uninterrupted long-term compounding. And what he points out is that there's compounding in relationships, there's compounding in trust, there's compounding in building awareness of each other's strengths and weaknesses, and knowing whose judgment to trust on different people or different topics. And the long-term piece of that is that his iron prescription is that you really don't want to spend a day working with anyone that you wouldn't spend your whole life working with, which is very extreme, but it's really easy to get on that slippery slope of like, well, it's just a day, it's just a week, it's just one job, and you find yourself miserable for years because you think something is only going to be short term. And when you say, if you're not willing to work with this person for your whole life, don't work with them for a day, all of a sudden it's this crystal clear, like, that's not how I want to spend my life. It makes you value your time, it makes you value your interactions, and in the long-term compounding perspective, if you're not willing to work with someone for 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, then you're not doing much to build the long-term value of trust in that relationship. That these long-term partnerships and these long-term kind of efforts, even in the startup world, it's kind of common to put together 2 or 3 people and take a run at a thing for a year. But if you're a founder of a company and you leave after a year or two, even if the company goes on to be successful, you aren't part of that long compounding journey that becomes an IPO and becomes a huge company. Like, you've really got to be careful which trains you get on, because you want to stay on one for a long time.
Yeah, I always think it's funny when, because I'm an investor, I do a lot of DCFs and I look at a lot of compounding, and the movement at the start is so meaningless, or it's not meaningless, it's just there's so little of it. The compounding is so tiny, you can't see it. And then you look at the terminal number, and the terminal number's much, much bigger than you can possibly imagine looking at the beginning number. And it's kind of that you have to get used to thinking in those exponential terms where little things done right now really do have this gigantic impact down the road. And it does. I've noticed that Buffett does the same thing, where he's not going to put something in his calendar for a week from now. If he's free and you're there and you want to get in touch with him, then it'll happen. But he's not going to tie up his calendar.
Yeah, and it's really painful, to kind of know you're 2/3 of the way into one of those compounding graphs that you can visualize, and that everything still feels tiny, and you've been at it for years, and like, you believe in compounding and you study compounding and you know the math, and it's still just so hard to look at small numbers and feel like you have earned more now, and just trust the process.
I think it's funny. It's one thing that I've just from talking to people, one of the things that I've noticed is that there's, talking to other entrepreneurs and other business guys, the thing that they all say is that it takes about 10 years for whatever you're doing to kind of start working. Is that, I mean, I know that you're an entrepreneur, you run, your Zali is your, do you want to give a plug for Zali? Just describe for everybody what that is.
Yeah, it is not my company. I just was like one of the very first employees. So we are about to turn 10, and it has been, a long winding journey through product market fit and discovery. And we were kind of very early to the switch to commerce happening like primarily on mobile and in real time and on demand. But we've initially launched as a meta marketplace. And so we were kind of going after Craigslist. And this was back in 2011. So this is before Uber. This is before Instacart. And we watched all of these use cases come up on our platform as people were kind of figuring out like, oh, there's real time GPS. Oh, there's, push notifications make a lot of this coordination problem a lot simpler. And then we watched these verticalized marketplaces start to pick off specific use cases because you had to get integrated with the supply and integrate with demand and own kind of one specific use case and brand. We're like, oh, this is going to be a totally different thing. And so about 2013, picked the vertical of home services and have been building kind of this managed marketplace for home services for the last few years, and really kind of getting deep into understanding all the nuances between, plumbers and lawn care and house cleaning and all of, this is this massively fragmented industry with incredibly low NPS that is still, pen and paper and phone calls and cash. It is kind of a weird world because it's 20 years behind the rest of the internet. And so you think that there'd be this like wave of adoption, but there's a reason why all these things are done this way still. And it's just
what is it?
There's a lot of demographic things. So a lot of the service providers are reasonably older. And so those things will be changing. There's a lot of, the distribution doldrums that Peter Thiel talks about where, enterprises clearly have huge contract value and then are driven by high touch sales processes and kind of lower LTV, viral things are driven by, network effects and pay-per-click and stuff like that. And there's this middle world that is kind of like small business that is just really, really tough to reach and tough to change because one guy's been doing things his way for 10 years and he's doing just fine doing things his way, and he's not being forced to change. And he's not going to get disrupted because he's a plumber and we're not innovating new ways to plumb. And so the like benefits to his daily life to go through the painful process of adopting new tools are pretty marginal.
Right. And
so it's just kind of there, and the supply demand balance is way out of whack, so that there's actually like a lot more plumbers and there's a lot more demand for plumbers, electricians, HVAC, these trades than there are reasons for so the homeowners have to kind of work the way that the service providers choose to work, and they just kind of follow along. So it is an interesting industry. And I think we'll see the changes kind of in our lifetimes, but it is fascinating to watch.
Yeah, it would be nice to have one spot to go to coordinate all of that stuff. It is a pain having to coordinate, and then every time it's a one-off job, so you don't, the plumbing's backed up, or you need a home handyman or something like that. Most of them are one-off jobs. Yeah, I would like that. I'd be happy to use that.
I'll let you know when we launch in your city.
Yeah, please. That's Los Angeles in Palos Verdes. What is the position of leverage that Naval talks about?
Yeah, leverage is kind of one of the key things that he talks about for building wealth. And he categorizes 3 different types of leverage. The first being capital, which is pretty self-explanatory. You make a bet with $100, or you make a bet with $1,000. You make a bet with $1 million. It's all the same bet, but the outcomes are wildly different. So you can get a lot of leverage by putting a lot of dollars against your judgment. The second is labor. So if you've got, one guy digging a ditch, you'll get a lot more done with 100 guys digging a ditch. But you've got to convince those guys to dig the ditch and pay them to do it. And usually both capital and labor are permissioned leverage, which means the people have to choose to follow you, or the capital has to choose to bet with you, unless it's your own money. The third form of leverage, which is kind of new to the world and we're still seeing the effects of, is what Naval calls products with no marginal cost of replication. So software, code, media, podcasts, books, these things that used to either not exist or exist only at high cost of replication. We're not that different. Jim O'Shaughnessy actually calls it like symbol manipulation, which I think is a kind of a good, like a little bit broader definition. But one design, one algorithm, one set of trading rules applied over and over and over and over again at no marginal cost. And usually these things are permissionless. So as long as you got a laptop, you can write code. As long as you got a microphone, you can make a podcast, and you can kind of put your hat into this ring of meritocracy that is the internet. And in general, great content tends to get more viewed. Excellent algorithms tend to get more capital put behind them. And so by seeing that leverage is what builds wealth and how you can kind of start accumulating leverage, when you look at the world through this lens, you start to see like how Jeff Bezos has leverage, how Elon Musk has leverage, how you have leverage. You know, this podcast we're going to record once, and somebody's going to be able to listen to it in 10 years and maybe find their way into your phone and listen to it. Like, content has this compounding kind of leverage to it that I'm sure you're aware of. But leverage is a good label for it that I think people have kind of intuited, but Naval kind of pulls it out and distills it as a principle to building wealth.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. My favorite part of Naval's tweet storms, and I think it started off like this one, and I really liked it because I'd been thinking about it quite a lot before it came up. He's got this how to get lucky. And I have my own thoughts on how to get lucky, but let's talk about Naval's, because Naval's been a lot luckier, or a lot more. You know, I think luck and skill sometimes. You know, guys who are very skillful are very good at getting lucky. That's been my observation for a lot of people who I've known, people who I've worked for, good investors, very, very good at getting lucky. What's the prescription?
A couple of beers and a good line. No, I think he Naval breaks down luck into kind of 4 pieces that I think I can do off the top of my head. But basically, like, you can cross your fingers and hope is like the most basic kind of lottery ticket thing. And then you get into increasingly how you control your luck or how you create more of it. I think of it like luck surface area. So you can do some things to increase the odds that luck finds you. So just kind of building in public, talking about what you're doing, talking about stuff you're interested in. All of a sudden, you'll kind of feel this tailwind of people connecting you with other people who are interested in the same things that you're interested in, or sending you articles, or, you know, sending you customers, right? Like, that can go a long way. And it'll feel like luck, but really like you did something to create that. The most extreme form is to become so unique and so well known as being unique that you are the only person who can unlock certain opportunities. And then what Naval says is luck becomes your destiny, which I think is a really interesting, like when you look at the hero's journey and like the Joseph Campbell quest, like it's a contrived story. And so it always feels made up, but we each have our own kind of like set of unique talents and set of unique challenges that we are the key to a unique lock somewhere out there, and life is just about finding that lock that you are the key to. And then it's going to feel like luck. Oh my God, my key fits this lock, but like you worked hard to find that lock and to become that key.
That's so funny because there's The Secret, which is totally woo-woo, it's totally bullshit, but there's some truth in the fact that if you start talking about something, you do, like, people who are interested in the same thing or who want that thing or want to help you with that thing, hear you say that, and then they get in contact and you do kind of manifest those things. Mm-hmm. It's not magic. It's just the way that things work. Yeah,
it's almost, I think it's like, if you need to believe it's magic, you can believe it's magic. That's fine. If you need to believe that it's, generating your own willpower, you can believe that it's generating your own willpower. I have some very successful friends, usually in the sales world, it seems to me, who are pretty diehard kind of manifestors, and they write down very specifically like the goals that they're going to achieve or the outcome that they're going to drive. And I think it's almost hacking like the commitment consistency bias. It's like, if that's my goal and you look at it every day, it kind of forces you to look at like, well, what am I doing to reach that goal? Is that the most important? Am I working on the most important thing? Like, can I expect to reach that goal with how I perform today? If not, like, it just makes you sick to your stomach to look at that gap, and you're like, fuck this, I'm doing something about this. Like, it's like just forces you to look at the inputs and outputs and try to kind of solve for X.
There's another thing that you said there that I think is really interesting, and this is in investors who I've known, and whether it's like at a venture capital stage or guys who are investing on the stock market, they seem to have the same attitude, and they look for these. It's a really hackneyed phrase, and it's used over and over again. But they look for these asymmetric opportunities where basically I'm going to do this thing, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't really matter. Like the downside's virtually nil, but the upside payoff is gigantic. And if you put a whole portfolio of those things together, you get enough of these things with these gigantic payoffs that you start looking like you're actually, there's something magic going on in the portfolio. You're not causing any of them to happen. You're just saying, if I put enough of these things in there and I can't lose on any of them, but I can win big on some of them, that's basically going to succeed. And then the destiny part of it is you have to look at it over a really long period of time. And if you start looking like that, then you start thinking, well, I can't have things that I can't blow up at any stage. If I blow up, I go back to zero. But if I can compound this and get lucky over like from here until kingdom come, then this is a strategy that should work.
Yeah, and it's funny hearing you describe that, because Naval in his angel investing is about the opposite of value investing from a mindset, right? Instead of like, rule number 1, don't lose money. It's like rule 1, be sure you lose money, because if you don't, like, you're missing out on something and you're not taking enough risk. But from the perspective of like, my downside is 1x and my upside is 100x, and you need one or two things to go huge, and then just keep compounding that. Like, you never know what they're kind of going to be, and you can try to get a little better at it and build more judgment and build some pattern recognition. But at the end of the day, like, there's very little information to go on. Right. And there's so many more unknowns than knowns, that you can only control so much. And so the portfolio effect just gets, really, really important. And there's not much investing specific stuff in the book, but there is some on the website. And Naval has done some really cool stuff with Spearhead around placing angel investments and how the portfolio math of those kind of things work.
To me, it's not that angel investing and value investing are so distinct. I sort of think of them all on a very long continuum, and it's just different mixes of frequency and magnitude. So if your frequency is low, your payoff has to be quite high, and so that's angel investing. And if that is in fact the case, then you want to have a lot more of those bets on. Like, you want to, and I think that's why I think it's Y Combinator that does it, where they just figured out that we're going to have, if we've got a $10 million portfolio, we're not going to have 10 $1 million positions. We're going to have 100 $100,000 positions, because if you get those gigantic payoffs, it almost doesn't matter whether you had $100,000 or $1 million in it. You just need to make sure that you catch that right tail. Like, that's all they're trying to do. With value, it's more like the magnitude is not going to be as big, but the frequency is, they're more frequent. So you can afford to be a little bit more concentrated. And so I think that, and you've just got to figure out where you are on the spectrum. If you're angel, you need more positions on. If you're value, you need fewer positions on.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it is a blow to the ego of angel investors that, like, you can't pick them. You think you can pick them. You can't. It doesn't matter what you do. Just get a lot of bets out. And, like, if that's the game you're playing, that's the game you're playing.
You just got to get lucky. And there's a book that tells you how. So sorry.
That's a good one. Like, actually, if you're thinking about how do you make luck your destiny, as far as angel investing goes, that's the world that I know a little bit more about. You have to become basically like the first choice investor. And how do you do that? By developing an incredible reputation, right, by being incredibly well known as an angel investor, by getting a lot of deal flow and having an incredibly like entrepreneur friendly and kind of value add reputation, which is well known. Like, no one would say that they are trying to do the opposite of that necessarily. But becoming that is difficult. And you can see in Naval's world how he has kind of executed that. I mean, he started AngelList, like, he's sitting at the crow's nest of the interchange of information in the startup world, right? It started with an email list and has built all the way up, and now there's billions of dollars to deploy, and he's funding other entrepreneurs to go and start their own kind of scout funds and deploy capital into niches that he won't necessarily have visibility into. And by increasing the tooling, he becomes, an expert in all of the mechanics of the deals. And this all started with like a somewhat contentious interaction with the VCs of one of his first startups, which I think is really interesting. But he knew once he wanted to go become an angel investor, like, I've got to make luck my destiny. How do I get the first look at every startup? How do I ensure that there's always room for me in any particular round? Because, startups have to accept your money in the startup world. So it's really interesting.
What was the contentious exchange? Do you know that story?
I know a little bit of it. There's, it's probably almost 20 years ago now, but basically he founded a company with 4 other people. And then
was that ePinions?
That was ePinions. The company got acquired by a company that eventually went public as part of shopping.com for $600 million or something. Like, it was a good outcome for that company. ePinions was acquired for not a particularly, I think it was money raised or something in that neighborhood, like not a particularly good outcome for the other founders. And I believe that there's a lawsuit that alleges, but was settled, so we don't really know, that basically that acquisition was done on less than full disclosure of information. And this was like one of the first times, and maybe only, like, you don't hear about this happening a lot, that like founders sue their own venture capitalists for basically like knowingly selling at a decreased value because the interests weren't aligned coming out the other side, and things were settled out of court. And I think it was like eventually like an okay outcome for everybody.
You sell a lower valuation because it squeezes out the founders and the guys who've got the preferreds, the prefs that compound, which are the VCs, because they've got we need to get 25% compound on these positions. So you don't get paid. Our prefs liquidate and there's nothing left over for whatever you're holding.
Yeah, and it was the founders that were no longer with the company. So I think some had left and some had stayed, but they got different treatment. And so that, is the painful kind of origin story of what made Naval like such a world-class expert at every single term in the deal sheets. And that's kind of what started Venture Hacks, was writing about the game theory of venture capital and where are your interests aligned with your venture investors and where are they not. As an entrepreneur, you're doing 1 or 2 or 5 fundraisers maybe in your whole life, and these VCs are writing 10 term sheets a year, and so there's this huge asymmetry of information. You don't know what questions to ask. You're like panicking because you're through your runway. You have very little leverage maybe if they're the only venture capital term sheet you're getting. And so entrepreneurs, especially back in like the 2000s, were getting terms were a lot less entrepreneur friendly. There was a lot less venture capital. And so I think, I don't know how much credit he would personally take for it, but he certainly deserves plenty of it, that Naval kind of like pushed the norm of those terms a lot more towards
the safe.
The safe came out of YC. It was another like kind of huge blow for that. It was not, he was not the only one carrying that flag. There's a lot of entrepreneurs and former founders turned investors who were kind of much more realized, like, you got to give all the control to entrepreneurs as much as you possibly can. Where the first era was much more kind of Don Valentine, like, we'll give them some money and we'll give them 6 months. And if they fuck it up, we'll give them the hook and put in a new guy. And like, that is, you don't see that hardly ever, because you see the returns of founder-led companies, and you see more and more kind of, founders taking companies public and going even further. But, there were no Bezos and Zuckerbergs to point at, or even, like Okta or Twilio, I think, is still led by the founder, well into their public tenure. So there's a lot of them now.
You just to go back to something you said earlier, you raised this interesting point, and we talked about it in context of Buffett. So if a bank gets into trouble, Buffett's the preferred investor because he's going to understand. He understands the business really, really well. Probably the best bank investor alive today. He's definitely got the capital, can make a decision really quickly. There's no committee. The same thing in my observation. I'm sure everybody else knows this too, but it exists in venture capital as well, right? That there are these firms and that's why this, I know that the performance of venture capital firms is very much like, if you're top quartile, then you're killing it, and basically everybody else is an also ran. And part of the reason is, if you're an entrepreneur and you get Sequoia or you get Benchmark or you get somebody big Kleiner Perkins, someone like that, they come in and they stick money into you. That's the imprimatur. You've got the stamp that Silicon Valley, the guys in Silicon Valley who know what they're doing, say that you are the real thing, and they're the lead steer, they're the bellwether, and everybody else follows on from that.
Yeah, it's interesting because that is reinforcing in a number of directions, right? So, the top 5 firms maybe. Not only do entrepreneurs want to take their money the most, LPs want to give them the money the most because the entrepreneurs show up. They have much more power in recruiting. So if I take Sequoia money, all of a sudden, my talent pool is increased, which means my odds of success are increased, which means I'll be able to raise more money from top tier firms. And so this is kind of self-perpetuating across a number of different stakeholders in the ecosystem. And then when you have great returns, you've got more LPs, you've got more money to deploy, you've got more talent, you've got more entrepreneurs, and this kind of keeps going. It's much harder for an upstart venture capital firm to unseat one of those things than it is, in the public markets where, stocks don't get to decide who they get sold to. If you see a good bargain, you can buy it. You can, the fluctuations and it is a lot more free to kind of find your way into some of those things. And it's less, network dependent and sales dependent. And, if you have a charismatic founder, that totally changes the kind of opportunities available to you.
It's kind of it's remarkable that Naval has done so well with AngelList to have built that to the place where it has, because it's sort of come out of nowhere, and it's now it's probably the best known angel, maybe even crossing over into venture at that point, right? Yeah,
it's interesting. It's kind of an amalgamation of different firms now, and I don't pretend to fully understand how they all kind of fit together. I know they are still innovating on kind of the structure of the fund and really pushing on who is allowed to invest and getting kind of more equitable treatment, lowering the barrier for accredited investors, because that's still a big piece of it. Naval actually lobbied Congress to get the Jobs Act passed back in 2007, I think, which is a kind of a brilliant bit of, he'd been building AngelList for 5 years or something by then, and then all of a sudden, new things are legal, that he's first in line to kind of go through the gate and do. And we still see accredited investor laws get changed, and the Jobs Act actually accidentally opened up the ICO boom. You used to not be able to openly solicit for investment at all. And now kind of all these, crypto offerings and white papers and stuff can openly solicit. Startups can just go on AngelList and say, hey, we're raising money. Please send us, lower, even $1,000 is kind of an entry point for angels now, which used to be all through lawyers. And if you weren't willing to write at least $25,000, you couldn't even get a seat at the table. My first angel investment, I had to angel investment in air quotes. I had to help get someone else into the fund and then buy a piece of their investment.
Yeah, right.
And so it's just I can't afford $25,000, but I can afford a fraction of that. So if you make an investment, I'll buy some of your investment behind off the table, and you had to kind of hustle some of that stuff. And now you can just go on AngelList and write a $2,000 check, and all of a sudden you're an angel investor, right? And so it democratizes the returns, and it enables startups to raise from people who, if you couldn't convince one of these 50 people to write a check to you, your startup didn't exist. And now you can, there's a lot more avenues available. And so, the demographics of who can start a company and where they can start a company are really changing. And I think that is only a positive thing, as Silicon Valley moves to the cloud. It really changes a lot of the structure of how that works. And the tooling is really what's doing that. And AngelList is behind a lot of those tools.
Well, let's change tack a little bit and talk about the second part of the book, where Naval starts talking about happiness. I remember from the Rogan podcast, and this is sort of, I don't want to say it's a Stoic philosophy, because Naval might have a different philosophy about the source of this, but it is a Stoic idea that you're sort of in charge of your own happiness. You can learn how to do it. You can make that choice. So what's Naval's attitude to happiness?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start, probably especially for your audience, which is, a bunch of super smart nerds. Alpha. Yeah. Yeah. I think the right intro is this idea that is like, well, if you're so smart, like, why aren't you happy? If you pretend to control all the things around you and, believe that you are an intelligent and capable person, your choices are either to say that happiness isn't important to you. You don't want it, which is to say, like, you've got a limited amount of time on the earth and you don't want to spend it, in peace and joy. You'd rather be, angry or unhappy or discontented or, desirous. Or you can understand that happiness is a skill and a thing that you can learn and a thing that's important to you, because eventually you're going to die and that'll be the end of the game. And, you won't be able to change anything. And so the sooner you kind of, I don't even want to say admit, but like come to the position that happiness matters to you, and that you want to spend your time being happy. And then you can kind of quickly get to, hey, like, happiness is controllable and it's a choice. I wasn't born at a certain level of happiness that I am fixed at. And it also probably helps to decouple believing that you have to be unhappy in order to be, accomplished or performant or, seen as respected and important. I think I'm not even exactly sure where it comes from. I'm sure everyone has their own source, but there's something telling us that in order to be accomplished or powerful or interesting or, successful, we have to go around being unhappy until we've accomplished those things, when the opposite is probably much more true. It is just difficult to it's counterintuitive for a reason that I still don't totally understand.
I think there are two things going on. One is the hedonic treadmill. Like when you people who are successful set a goal, achieve that goal, and you should be excited when you achieve something that you set out to achieve. But what happens is that goes away really quickly and you're kind of looking for the next thing. And so you're kind of back to that level of dissatisfaction that you had, even though you've done something that you wanted to do. The other thing, it's sort of more in my world, but bears and shorts sound smarter for the reason that you've got this like Panglossian, like everything's great and I'm really happy. And they're like, oh, well, what about this over here or this thing? You're not thinking about that. And you're like, yeah, well, if I think about that, that does make me really upset. But that's a good argument for not thinking about that.
Yeah, I think there's a pithy little like tweet in there that basically says like it's really easy to be cynical and it's really easy to be pessimistic. For whatever reason, it sounds smart, and there's an archetype of like, the prickly, smart, sharp, Spock-like character who's kind of like running around reminding everyone why everything is shit and they should be unhappy, and it's not as good as they think it is. And it's helpful to have. You don't want to be blind to those things, because it's hard to make good decisions if you only see the world through rose-colored glasses. But there's also understanding that you can put those in their place and that you can look at those things, in a work and decision-making context, but not necessarily have to live in fear or, anger at those things that aren't correct. Take the step that you can take and move on. The rarest breed, by Naval's kind of 2x2 matrix is optimistic contrarian.
Yeah.
So understanding, when everyone is wrong to the downside, but you can still see the bright side of things, and picking and choosing when to put those glasses on and off. You don't have to be one person or one type of person all the time.
Yeah, an author who I love reading in that context is John le Carré, because he spends a lot of time. A lot of it is about trying to catch spies and trying to figure out what somebody else is doing. And so you've got to look at this behavior and do you give this guy the benefit of the doubt, or is he doing something where he needs to be caught? If you haven't read him, he's got 20 really, really great books that I reread on occasion. I'm a big fan. You ever read le Carré?
No, it sounds awesome.
Yeah, I recommend it. They're great books. Well, let's talk about saving yourself. How do you save yourself?
Yeah, it is a form of kind of radical self-responsibility. There's this, it's kind of across every category of life. Like, we are told that there are experts and that they will tell us what to do, and just trust the government, trust the doctors, trust the media. Don't worry about it. Just turn your brain off and do what we tell you. And pretty much without exception, that is either those external forces are either neutral or harmful, and that you really have to take responsibility for your own life and your own decisions into your own hands, and like work hard to question doctors, question media, question the government. Like, if you're just allowing someone else to set your priorities kind of unfiltered, like, that is just always a dangerous place to be. You should always stop and question what that person or organization or institution's motivations are. What would be easier for them to have you do? What do you actually want the outcome to be? Are you certain that this message is helping you kind of reach that outcome? We trust doctors because they're incredibly well educated, and they're in a shiny hospital with billions of dollars of equipment, and they regularly perform miracles, and that is truly incredible. On the other hand, like, the FDA has given us fundamentally incorrect or incomplete nutritional information for living memory, and there's no reason to believe that they're completely correct now.
They've got it right now.
Right? Yeah. Is that illusion that, like, well, we are living in the age of peak knowledge, which maybe we are. We certainly know more than we did 100 years ago. But
it's funny how often we circle back to stuff that we knew 100 years ago, though.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's why we used to do that. Okay, now I get it.
Yeah, we're almost certainly, like, innovation is doing us maybe as much harm as good, and it's just a matter of, like, finding out, where, like, potato chips aren't better for us than potatoes, but they are an innovation. So, like, which things do you pick up and which do you leave behind? And who do you trust as information sources? Like, there's increasing benefits to deluding you and to misleading you. And this is kind of back where, you can only spend so much of your time being suspicious and paranoid and, questioning everything around you. Like, that is an exhausting activity and is likely to make you unhappy.
Yeah.
But finding those things that, and sticking to those fundamentals that are true, and avoiding the stuff that, or at least learning to look at the second level, motivations and interests of people around you.
What I have found is that questioning things doesn't make me unhappy, but it makes everybody else around me really unhappy. My wife just tortured all the time because I keep on saying, "Why are we doing it this way?" She's like, "That's the way everybody does it." Most of the time it's right. That's the way to do it. But sometimes you just gotta poke at everything and figure out why.
Yeah, the reflex to ask a question is a valuable one. I have had similar experiences. It is uncomfortable to go against the crowd. If you walk into a room and 100 people are watching the news and believing every word, you're going to experience some pain if you try to convince them otherwise, because they're all comfortable in a herd.
Yeah.
If everybody's drinking a Coke and you're drinking water, like, that's going to feel uncomfortable. And you really you've got to have conviction in the things that you choose to swim upstream about, because swimming upstream socially is exhausting and painful. And we are herd animals. You're reading Sapiens, like, you this, like, that's even when you're right, it's not any easier.
Well, that's the example I was just thinking of as you were saying that. Like, there are lots of benefits to believing in these sort of shared imaginary things, because it allows us to coordinate and do things. But it's also good to have people standing there saying, well, why do we do it? Like, why are we doing it that way? Like, that's not a real thing. We could do it this other way that is a better way of doing it. And that's basically how we've progressed for the last, 70,000 years.
Yeah, it is a... this is not a well distilled thought yet, but there's something interesting that, like, you have to trust the herd and the social proof on most decisions, but the real progress and the real divergence comes from where you're willing to be a heretic. When you're Galileo willing to kind of go against the church, or Bill Gates willing to, like, all of challenging these assumptions is where kind of big changes come from for you personally and for all of humanity. But it's painful, and you've got to let the other 98 decisions just go and choose to go with the herd, because you can't do 100 out of 100 from first principles. Like, you just can't.
It's funny, in the same context, there's a great series of books by Neil Stevenson where he's writing about, he's a science fiction author, but he writes about Isaac Newton. I think it's called the Quicksilver. It's a series of 3 books. I'm just going to blank on the name at the moment, but it's the I think Quicksilver might be the first book in it, but he's talking about Isaac Newton discovering Principia Mathematica, and part of that, it's set in the time of plague in London, and it's so funny. He says that one of the characters says, I've reached this age where I can basically live out my days, but now I have to travel, which means I'm probably going to reduce the length of my life because I'm going to have to go where there are lots of other people gathered together, which is, that's how you get the plague. You go where other people are. That's how you get sick.
Yeah, that's true.
This is all pre-pandemic. This stuff, it's all written. And it's kind of great. That's one of those things that I think we've known this stuff for just so long. But yeah. I'd never thought about that before. Traveling probably does make you sick because you come in contact with a lot of other things that you just don't see on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you sick in the short term, and if you catch the plague, maybe you'll die. But it also strengthens your immune system and exposes you to new ideas and broadens your perspective. And so, it is one of those, you're exposing yourself to harm in the hope that you're anti-fragile and you come out the other side stronger. But yeah. It's you can't go below 0 on that one.
So I saved this for last. It's not a big topic. It's just the meanings of life. What is it? Just to wrap up.
Yeah, there's some. Naval has 3 answers. Some more scientific than others. I think the first one is that there is none. The third one is that there is kind of this coming heat death of the universe that's driven by global entropy.
Yeah.
That if you're interested in, you'll be interested in, but is not particularly helpful for changing the way you live day to day. And the second, kind of in the middle, is probably the one that you carry with you, which is really that you have to decide your own meaning for life. It is a burden, and one that we outsource to varying books and churches because it's a really hard question, and it is difficult to kind of realize that you have to do it yourself, and you have to decide yourself, and then you have to hold the conviction. And if you keep changing your mind, back to what we were talking about, long-term compounding, you're changing directions every year and changing meanings every year, it's going to be hard to build up something really satisfying. What if you pick a mission or 2, or your family, your work, staying healthy, caring for others, and really kind of dedicate your life to it over a long period of time and keep getting better at it and keep finding ways to serve your mission better. I think you'll find that rewarding. And if you find it rewarding, that's all that matters. It's a single player game.
Yeah, I love that answer, and I think that's a great sentiment to end it on. Eric, if folks want to buy the book, follow along with what you're doing, how do they go about doing all of that?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, just my full name, Eric Jorgenson. The book is available in digital versions for free on the website, Navalmanack.com with a CK. If you want to buy the physical version, you can do that on Amazon. They got paperback, they got hardcover. We got a cheap Kindle version there, but you can also get the PDF on the website. And the book in full will be on the website as well. It's important to all of us to make it freely available for everyone. It's very rewarding to see people kind of all over the world reading this stuff and emailing me about it. I do a bunch of random kind of side projects and stuff that if you're on Twitter or my email list, you'll get exposed to a very random smattering of my brain from time to time.
That's great. Eric Jorgenson, who is the editor of the Navalmanack.
I guess. I never know what to say. I feel like it's weird to say I've written a book because I didn't write anything. Like a creator.
Yeah. Creative force behind Navalmanack. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Hope to see you again in Omaha soon when this is all over.
Likewise, if I can travel.